Garret Prestage from the Kirby Institute in Sydney, Australia, presenting on data from the Flux cohort study of drug use among gay and bisexual men in Australia, which is a study set up primarily to look at rates of initiation and predictors of initiation of a range of drugs, but particularly crystal methamphetamine use among gay and bisexual men. What we've found is that the initiation rates for crystal methamphetamine and for illicit drugs generally are very high and quite rapid over time. That the drug crystal particularly is mainly used in the context of sex for sexual enhancement, in the context of intensive sex partying, or what's often described as chemsex scenes. What's predictive of that is actually primarily being immersed in social networks of gay men who also use crystal. So having friends who use crystal is predictive of the likelihood to initiate crystal use. One of the interesting things that we've found is, one of the very interesting things, is that there is actually very little relationship between the use of illicit drugs generally, including methamphetamine, and mental health. So just using the drugs is not necessarily indicative of poor mental health. What is indicative of poor mental health, though, is dependent use or problematic use. So those men who use those drugs at relatively high rates, or for whom there are problematic issues around their use of those drugs, in those men you find rates of depression and anxiety, for example, are considerably higher. And then the other thing that we've been looking at is the rate of initiation of PrEP use, and what we find is that, that in many ways it actually mirrors the rates of methamphetamine use, but probably the essential point is that men who initiate PrEP are pretty much those who would be eligible to initiate PrEP. So the kinds of men that should be using PrEP are the kinds of men who commence using PrEP.